So joining me now to talk more about what the retail investor is doing is Bret Kenwell. He's a U.S. investment analyst at eToro. Bret, thank you so much for joining.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you because you have a unique perspective specifically on the retail investor, not necessarily the institutions who trade major money, but that retail investor at home who might be watching our show. What is the sentiment of the retail investor right now?
Yeah, the sentiment is pretty good for retail. When we talked to them in late November, early December, we're fresh off the election. Markets were at all-time highs, making new highs, especially a lot of those tech names, AI names, and they remain bullish coming into the year. Almost two-thirds of respondents expect the bull market to continue in 2025, and we're seeing some reshuffling after the election and coming into a new year.
Yeah, so talk to me more about that sector rotation and what might be more in favor as other sectors maybe do take a back seat.
Sure. So the first spot that really jumped out was crypto. Two-thirds of respondents did say that they were planning to increase crypto allocations coming into 2025. That's not too surprising, I think, with the momentum that we've seen in Bitcoin and with the incoming administration's new, sort of view towards the space. And another place was equities. Obviously, it's not too surprising to hear that, but when we look closer into equities, it was really tech stood out a lot. Tech was the number one sector that investors plan to allocate more to in the coming year, which may not be too surprising to hear, but it actually, kind of is when you look at the data, because the financials were actually the number one sector for investors throughout 2024. But yeah, tech is the place where investors are looking.
How are data points like inflation driving activity on eToro's platform?
Yeah, inflation actually was the top fear for investors when they look at risks for their portfolio. They're worried about inflation, and 24% of respondents said that was the top worry for them coming into this year, which is actually down from 30% in Q3. So it sort of says it's not as much of a concern as it was before, but it's still top of mind for investors, and particularly the Gen X and millennials were really concerned about inflation.
You mentioned technology earlier, and it does seem as if artificial and technology almost are one in the same, right? Certainly these mega cap technology companies are investing heavily in technology, and many companies that are still private also trying to harness that AI component as well. What is the AI trading activity on eToro?
So when we look at AI specifically, we see a lot of stocks that did really, really well into the end of the year. NVIDIA and Palantir really come to mind, but we saw kind of an interesting divergence among retail investors. So 60% of retail expects them to continue higher in 2025, and yet only 22% of respondents, so less than a quarter, expect or have an allocation to that group right now, and that's down from Q3. But my expectation, my thought process behind that is maybe some of those investors took some off the table, took some profits in early Q4, and are looking to redeploy that capital in 2025 if we see a pullback.
Yeah, so as it stands now, the S&P is probably just down about maybe 3.5% from its all-time high, given markets surging behind us on the back of some decent data, right? Not maybe as bad as feared. And of course, those positive results from the banks. Every sector is different. We'll see how well other sectors perform as this earnings season does continue to carry on. But by and large, Bret, do you anticipate that people will be adding to their portfolios throughout the year? On your platform, does that usually happen at the start of the year, or do you see it on an event like a pullback?
Really, we do tend to see it around when we have big events in the market. Typically when volume ticks up on NYSE, for instance, that's when we see our volume tick up as well. So I would think that when we start to get to these, deeper parts of the pullback, or even on big up days like we're having today, that's when retail will start to get more involved back in the markets. Maybe feel they have a little bit of a green light here. But when we zoom out and look at the markets in general, I think we're still in a structurally strong market, even though we're kind of in the throes of like you mentioned, a minor correction right now. But the main catalysts of the bull market are still intact.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of what Monday might bring, the market is actually closed that day, but it is the inauguration of a new administration. Has that changed the dynamics on eToro at all?
I don't think so. I mean, if anything, it's just nice to have the event out of the way. The election's in the books. We have clarity. The markets love certainty. And so just to have that sort of finished and done with, we can start to turn our attention forward to 2025 and what the new year brings.
We haven't yet covered crypto, right? Bitcoin is surging through $100,000 a token. Bret, I'm sure something that you followed toward the end of last year. A lot of that was a post-election boost. Also, of course, the first Bitcoin ETF getting approved by the SEC at the start of 2024. What's the crypto status on eToro?
Crypto remains bigger than it's ever been. It's a major focus point among retail investors, not just with eToro, but with retail as a whole. It remains hot. I think it's twofold. I think it's the momentum that we saw late in 2024 really carrying. Investors feel comfortable with the bull trade. Bitcoin's had 2 great years back to back. So I think investors are looking for that momentum to continue, but at the same time, the expectations for the regulatory environment are that things will ease and become a little more lax.
Bret, what does the data show about how generations are investing and trading on eToro? Do you have that data?
Yeah, so when we look at retail, actually, by generation, we see the youngest of the generation, so like a Gen Z, is actually kind of gravitating towards cash and bonds, sort of an interest, sort of plan interest rates, which is kind of interesting. Wouldn't really expect that from the younger generation, but at the same time, they are the ones that do have large life purchases that coming up in the near term, and we're fresh off of 2 strong years in the markets where the S&P gained more than 20%. So maybe that's them saying, let's take some money off the table, put it in the savings account, and we'll save that for our rainy day. When you look across more like millennial or Gen X, they're a little bit more diversified. They're focused on crypto, they're focused on stocks, and then our older generations are actually focused more towards like dividend stocks, income plays.
Of course, probably as they get closer to the retirement age.
Sure.
Bret, just very quickly before I have to let you go, we do want to inform our viewers just in terms of the right way to trade. What would you advise them?
Position size is always really important when it comes to trading, comes to investing. Really being mindful of your leverage, especially when you get into environments where volatility is elevated, when environments start to get choppy. You want to be careful.
All right. Bret Kenwell joins me here in studio. He's a U.S. investment analyst at eToro. Bret, thank you so much for joining. I know you're going to have a busy few weeks probably following the data amid this earnings season.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Joining us from Michigan, Bret, thank you.